And we most recently talked about Succession a few weeks ago after the first three episodes had premiered on HBO. Now, folks, spoilers for Succession because this season is wrapped up. We've already talked about it in detail, again, as I mentioned at the top of the season. So we're just going to dive right in and talk about everything that's happened over the course of the final season of Succession, especially the series finale. So if you've not caught up with Succession, if you're still working your way through the show, want to give you that spoiler warning before we dive in. And so as I mentioned a few weeks ago, we talked about the first three episodes because it was so important to check in with Succession. Because after the third episode, we lost the lead of the show. Logan Roy died, and it happened during a very, very pivotal moment at Connor's wedding. We were certainly misdirected, I think, by the cast and crew, thinking that we were going to primarily focus on Connor getting married. Well, instead, they decided to kill off the main lead of the show, and we wanted to come back and revisit the series notably because this is the final episode, or excuse me, the final season of this show, but also just because so much has happened ever since that third episode took place over the course of the past few weeks. And what's very interesting, I think, about this season of Succession is that every episode after the death of Logan Roy pretty much takes place over the course of like a day. It's like all the successive days after his death. It's not like there's a huge time jump that happens here. We don't fast forward a few months. Like every single episode focuses on a really, really pivotal moment as we see the Roy family pretty much fight for power to see who's going to ultimately fill the shoes of Logan Roy. So before we actually get to the series finale, and before we do talk about this final episode, I want to quickly get your thoughts about just everything we've seen. There've just been so many really seminal moments and events. We got an episode that pretty much focused on the Roy family going over to Norway for the Gojo retreat to talk about the negotiations between their family and Matson. We got the Living Plus episode, which is going to be this huge initiative that Logan wanted to see brought to life that they were moving forward with. There was also the episode with the presidential election, which was just crazy. The funeral episode, which we had been talking about and expecting for a few weeks there. There were just huge, really pivotal moments. And I think every single week they had a focus and an intention to do something that was going to really just like knock our socks off and deliver something truly spectacular. So just kind of want to get your thoughts on all the events that took place between episodes 3 and of course the series finale, and just like what were your big picture takeaways and what did you think about the episodes that they rolled out?
This is really, I think, the heaviest season of Succession where I'm seeing theories being thrown like crazy. I mean, Twitter, Reddit, amongst friends, you and me have talked about who the hell is going to get this throne to maintain I guess to be the head of Waystar. That's like the thing of this season and especially since Logan has passed, and it's just been so fun to watch. It really has. I've seen some of the best theories of like any show I've ever seen with some people. I've attended a couple of spaces that I was just like, oh, what are they talking about? Succession. Let me hop in here, and they be talking fire stuff that could happen, stuff that might happen, and yeah, it's just been a very enjoyable experience. I think living within this last season of Succession because one, it's very clear that a lot of us really love the show. It's just very good writing. And not only that, but we know after 3 seasons, we know enough about these characters and about the writers to say, okay, they could go in this direction and it still makes sense. And I love that about the show. It was like that. Of course, this is very unfortunate, but it was like that for Game of Thrones for a while too, right? Where you're like, okay, it could go this way. We know these characters, it could go that way. And I really love when the show is wrapping up, how everyone can be engulfed like that. And we can all have, I think, input. And so it's been great to see everything play out week to week because things are moving up and down and left and right. But we have gotten, again, still to the very end, some of the best moments of television I think we've gotten in a long time, man. And it's been great to see again these characters unfold, or shoot, really the opposite, fold back up in some ways in themselves. And to watch, I think this whole thing happen so quickly. It's crazy that we're talking about the finale. I'm like, damn, Succession over. It makes me sad as well, as much as it makes me happy to see that it has concluded. But it's been great, man, and it's been a very enjoyable experience. The acting remained. I mean, we have some stuff to talk about in here, so that's just wow. Like, I can't believe they did this, and it's not only the acting either. it's not only the writing, they've been doing technical things in the show that I don't know people have been paying attention to that have just been astounding, and very, very good decisions being made. And if you stay after to watch the end of each episode, where again the writers and directors are telling you, you know, their thoughts and ideas, it all just feels good, and it felt good to be here and to witness something like this happen on TV, man. So yeah, I think season 4 is one of those examples of, I think when you care about something, I think you also understand how and when to end it. I think that's important, right? We talk about that a lot. A lot of TV shows go too long, and so I didn't feel like that was with this season. I didn't feel like anything was rushed, really. I didn't feel like anything was really cheated. It was like the writers were like, you know, I feel like it's time to end, and I feel like we have to honor it, you know, and there's a right way to do it. And I feel like they did it correctly in my point of view. And so yeah, man, I'm just happy that the shows exist and that they gave us this show in general. But I absolutely I absolutely love this season.
I think for any lesser show, when you lose the main lead, the prospect of that and what that might ultimately mean, I would be totally concerned. Like, oh, so we're just going to proceed without our main character. I initially felt that way about Game of Thrones when, spoiler alert, Ned Stark gets beheaded at the end of the first season. It's like, well, what is the show from here on out? And then you see like there's so much more to do. There's so much more to tell. And in actuality, you're in the best possible situation and you're dealing with the best hands that are going to take care of all the other characters that they built around that main centerpiece. And that's exactly the case of what we're dealing with here in Succession. I was never worried after we saw sort of the demise of Logan Roy and seeing the departure of Brian Cox, who has been the absolute pillar of the show and just one of the greatest creations in character history on TV, depart this show. I was never concerned because I was like, well, no, the rest of this cast is incredible. Everybody is so interesting. There's so many other dynamic stories to tell. And this is actually the fabric of the show. It's about who's up next. That's what they set out to do from the get-go. They teased Logan's death in the second episode of the first season. So we've been dealing with this idea for a long time now. And coming into these episodes following his death after Connor's wedding, I'm like, oh, we are still dealing with the best hands possible, because every time out, they were just swinging for the fences and doing all the things that they needed to do to make you still believe that the characters that we had grown to know over the course of these past like 3 to 4 years were going to move and operate and navigate the spaces in which we expected them to. And in doing so, they are partially responsible for their own unraveling. And that's the delicious stuff about Succession. We want to see how they're going to fuck all of this up to begin with, because we know that these people are just not serious people, as Logan told us all those episodes ago. And I just found myself to be completely enthralled and totally wrapped up into all the stuff that they were doing. Was every episode a 10 out of 10? No, there were some moments where I'm like, okay, this probably could have been moved along a little bit better or faster, or maybe we could have focused on other elements a little bit more. But by and large, I was completely here for it. And even if an episode didn't quite live up to the stature of what I wanted it to, I'm thinking about like the tailgate party episode the night before the election. That was probably the weakest episode of the season, but the way that it ends with Shiv and Tom is like, oh, we might have just witnessed like one of the most nuclear conversations in recent TV memory. It's crazy.
Exactly.
So they always have those moments, even if an episode feels somewhat lesser compared to some of the other ones. And so I thought that this is, again, another example of phenomenal TV. They stuck the landing with the series finale, which we'll get to in a second. But I do want to talk about sort of our three main leads and just like the development of where we see them over the course of those episodes before the series finale. And we'll talk about Kendall, Roman, and Shiv here, but I do want to start with Kendall, because after Logan dies, I think we start to see Kendall really want and step up to the opportunity and the idea of him finally, I guess, living out the purpose of his life and truly taking the throne. We start to see Kendall take a bit of a dark turn, but he also becomes a little bit more cunning and wise just based off of all the experiences of what we've seen him go through over the course of those first few seasons. Because if you looked at Kendall in season 1 and even season 2, it's like, yeah, this guy's not ready. Like, there's no way he's going to be ready to take the throne. By this time, I think that the show runners and the filmmakers started to get us to buy into the idea of Kendall finally feeling like he's going to realize his potential. And they had me believing, because I thought like, oh, Kendall might get it this time out. Like, that was my prediction, that Kendall was going to ultimately get the throne by the end of this. And we start to see him kind of go down that Michael Corleone route, becoming sort of the godfather, leaning into the darkness, starting to become what I think people had feared he would become and tried to keep him away from. But now he's starting to like actually realize that. And it even got to a point where he was willing to fuck up the Gojo deal and go behind Mattson, and him and Roman were also, sort of co-CEOs leading this all together. And then all the way up until the last episode, like they had me firmly believing like Kendall has upper hand on everybody. Like he is making the moves that he needs to make. What did you think about just seeing Kendall, start to really take the reins and be the leader that I think a lot of people wanted him to be, but never believed he could be over the course of those episodes?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because really all of these characters are the worst people. Like none of them are good people. No matter how much you like somebody, you're like, you just have to admit that they're probably not a great person. And Kendall is probably the most definition of that, right? He's probably the biggest definition of that. He probably is close to the most assholish of them all. He probably is close to his record ain't clean. He low-key killed a person. You know what I mean? Like,
got a body.
And so it's crazy that they have shaped, I think, his story for me in particular to be like, I'm at least for me to be like, dang, I'm kind of rooting for him a little bit. You know what I mean? Like when he gets on the stage and talks about living plus, I was like, Kendall, is he doing this thing? Because I love the way the Living Plus episode is set up, because you're like, everybody in the show and all of us as viewers are like, this is going to go so bad, this is going to be so terrible, and then you're like, he kind of just killed that. Kendall, what's going on here? Like you said, he starts making moves. You know what I'm saying? He is going behind people's back, but it feels very keen to what is supposed to happen if you're in that position. Like people have done that, or people will do that. And so when he's doing those things, I'm like, yeah, this checks out. You know what I mean? And it feels like these are decent moves being made too. Like none of this feels bad. And so it is so interesting that this show can make you both go, man, this guy is not the best person in the world, but also like, you've been through some shit as well. And so I am kind of rooting for you a little bit. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic of the show, because it's really like that for kind of everybody. You're like, everybody is terrible, but sometimes I'm kind of rooting for you, or I want you to do this thing, or I want you to be successful in that. Of course, there are times you're like, nah, bro, you're not right. I hate you in this moment. Go away. You're the worst. But the fact that there are all those glimpses of hope for characters is really, again, a testament to how good the writing is in this show. And to see Kendall kind of somewhat bounce back post the death of his father is so interesting, especially with us talking about, okay, who's going to get the throne. And like you said, there was a lot of lines pointing at Kendall for a while. It really was. And it was never 100%, we kind of knew that, but it was it was ramping up, and to see that come realized, it was so interesting, especially given his trauma, right? When he's telling his siblings, like, my dad sat me down at 7 and was like, this is mine. And part of you was like, that's not wrong. And part of you was like, maybe the sheet that we got, is that a line through Kindle, or is that a line? Is that you start to ask questions yourself, and I love how unsure everyone is in the process of this film. So yeah, man, it's been such an interesting journey with Kindle, but it's been a ride though. I'll tell you that.
I mean, they took every opportunity, I think, to really build him up, to get us to believe as an audience, like, this really might be his time. You see what happened in the Living Plus episode, as you mentioned. He starts on a stumble because of the tweet shit from Mattson, but then is able to turn it around completely and just like bring that whole thing home. Even the episode at the retreat when they go to Norway and they're trying to, figure out what is this deal ultimately going to mean. Him and Roman just decide, like, you know what, we're going to torpedo this. Like, we're going to just completely like not allow this to happen. Now, of course, Shiv is also making her own moves behind their back, but you start to get the sense that Kendall is just so aware of the situation and ready to be one step ahead. And then, by the time we arrive to the election and the funeral, the guy is just like, he's at the top in terms of positioning, I think, amongst everybody, because the presidential election episode, which is, wild in and of itself, he's able to spot Shiv's antics, from afar because of the tip that he got from Greg. And then the
Mm-hmm.
funeral comes up and we're expecting Roman to have this big moment. He folds, and who's there to, really again, once again, bring it home? It's Kendall. He's the one that's going to deliver the speech and say all the right words and be there to deliver this eulogy and be that face. And you even get, the president, you get him saying like, perfect speech that couldn't have been done any better. So I think that they did everything that they needed to do to get us to buy into the idea like it might actually be his time before they ultimately made it all crumble before our very eyes. That should, sort of lead us to talking about Roman, who had a very, very interesting journey this season. I mean, we know Roman is going to be the one to say the most problematic shit in any situation. He's always going to have the jokes ready to go and the responses to fire back with. But where we find him after the death of his father is in a place of, I think, resilience and reluctance to accept the fact that
Mm-hmm.
his father passed away. When they go to Norway and they're, sort of talking to Matsson, Roman explodes on Matsson. Matsson is basically talking so much shit about him and is like, I like dealing with your father a lot more. You guys are just not equipped for this. Like, I mean, he's burying
Mm-hmm.
them. And Roman just unleashes. And from that moment on, Roman is not willing to accept that his father is actually gone. He's the one
Yeah.
that has just not dealt with this. He's the one that has not decided to cope and grieve in the way, that one probably should after the death of a parent. And it all comes to a head at the funeral, which, I think we should, spend a little time talking about in a second. But what did you think about Roman simultaneously dealing with these feelings internally, but also still trying to keep up that front of being at the top of the company along with Kendall, still being at the forefront, still helping to navigate and maneuver and make these deals the way that they needed to, but also, internally the guy's just like crumbling on the inside and doesn't know how to cope and deal with it all.
Right, as he said, he pre-grieved, as he said, or he has pre-grieved. It's so interesting how, like you said, we are feeling the effects of Logan Roy post his death in this TV show, and I love how very clear it is when you see the behavior of each child of how important he was to them, no matter the kind of person he was. You know what I mean? Like, it's still your father, and he was still part of their life. It wasn't like he was like a deadbeat. You know what I'm saying? He like was still very much there. He just was not the best person in the world. In that sense, and Roman definitely feels like that to me. He feels like, in a lot of ways, he tries to neglect the feelings he had for his dad in almost the same way that his dad tried to neglect him. You know what I mean? Or in some ways neglected him. But what's so interesting about Logan is he did touch each of them in a way to say, like, you could be it. And that is eating them up. You know what I'm saying? In each in their own individual way. Again, Kendall does feel the most entitled, right? What does he say? I'm the eldest son or whatever. But it's something about it's something about I don't know why I'm blanking. It's something about Roman that just he has been so playful for so long. Now the biggest reality has hit him. And I feel like he has the need to continue to feel playful in a lot of ways, right? Like that is how he deals with all of that stuff. He's always constantly cracking jokes because he's nervous. He's always constantly cracking jokes because he's anxious. He's always cracking jokes because there's something underneath it all that he feels uncomfortable with. He's always been that guy. And now this is the biggest thing that has happened to him. And he kind of feels like he has to continue to be that guy. And it's so interesting watching the way in which he processes that, because we could all tell, like, this dude is not okay. And eventually it does erupt in his face at the funeral. But it's like, it's just really cool, I think, and interesting. It's like, I love how different each child, each sibling is because of that. And it's so interesting, man. And it's I love Kieran Culkin has been going crazy this season with the acting chops. I mean, wow. Specifically, of course, episode 9, I think, which is the funeral, and a couple other episodes. But the dude has been really killing it. Even more than some previous seasons. I think this might be like the season for him. Like, he was really eating out here. But it's yeah, he's been like one of the more interesting parts for me, because again, he kind of was groomed, right? Like, he was the person that got called before his dad died. His dad was like, all right, I need you to do this thing for me. He was on his way to the wedding when he got a call from his dad. And you could tell he had those weird conflicts within him too. That's like, I low key might want to be with my dad in these moments, you know what I mean? Or Loki might want to be on his side, although he is with Shiv and Kendall in this moment. So he had a really big conflict as well in this season, and it's just crazy to see it blow up. As the person who tried to cover it up the most, it just makes sense to me that he also kind of blew up the most out of each of the siblings. But it's been a very interesting thing to watch unfold.
Yeah, Roman has probably the most defense mechanisms developed out of all the siblings just based on
Mhm.
his personality and the fact that he really refuses to confront real life. This is a guy, all of the children, but especially Roman, their lives are consumed by the idea of going to meeting. They only exist in chauffeured SUVs across New York City. They don't interact or sort of investigate the real world in any meaningful way. They live in this
Mhm.
bubble. They've always been isolated from the rest of the real world. And so Roman, as a adult who's had to deal with development and maybe stunted growth, all of that stuff comes out this season when his father passes away, because I think it's so resonant, the fact that, Logan tells him, like, I love you all, but you're not serious people. Roman becomes like the physical manifestation of that, because their father being the one serious person and the rest of them not being quote unquote serious people, Roman does not know how to navigate and deal with that reality at all. And so you see him start to lash out on everybody, essentially, like he's just refusing to confront the reality of what's happening here. He lashes out on Mattson. He
Mhm.
fires the head of the Waystar studio in the episode. Then he tries to fire Jerry. He's just making these really impulsive decisions. And then you get to the presidential election episode where he is just like moving at a frantic pace, wanting to call the decisions very prematurely, and doesn't really give a fuck about the ramifications at all. And so it's clear that the guy is not equipped to deal with these high pressure situations. And it's also
Mhm.
clear that his emotional liability is so high that he's going to put the company and everybody around him in very, very precarious positions, that it's very clear he's not ready. But at the same time, Roman is just also like that person that you can just tell probably received the least love and affection out of any of the children at a young
Right.
age. And that's affected
Mhm.
him the most in these ways, because he still acts like so much of a child, and he still acts so prematurely, especially when his back is against the wall. So I love that stuff that we saw out of him. And it really boiled over in that church and state episode, the penultimate episode, where you see him go into the protesters and
Mhm.
now finally being confronted with the real world and just real people who don't give a fuck about him at all. They're like beating on him and pushing him out the way, and they're telling him, fuck you. Like, now he has to realize, oh, I'm not anything. Like, I'm nothing. And I've been nothing my entire life. And that becomes a
Wow.
crystallized idea in that moment for him. And so I really love that.
Mhm.
Shiv, the one sister of the family, had an equally emotional roller coaster of the course of this episode. I mean, we find out so many things about Shiv that she's just been dealing with, that have been bubbling under the surface. We find out she's pregnant. She's also going through a separation with Tom, who Tom is continuing to try to navigate and find his positioning in all of this. He's going to be the kiss ass that he always wants to be, but they are going through something very traumatic. I mean, this is heartbreaking. We could debate all day long whether or not Shiv actually loved Tom or not. Probably doesn't, but this is still a very traumatic thing, that they are separating, that they're going to go through this divorce.
Mhm.
And then alongside that, she's also now fighting for her own position, because Roman and Kendall have made the choice to become co-CEOs. They basically push Shiv out because optically it just won't look good to the rest of the board and to the public. And that causes her to make her own deals and her own moves. And she starts to develop this relationship behind the scenes with Mattson, and basically just securing her position and her future, essentially wanting to become the American CEO for the company if
Mhm.
Mattson is ultimately able to acquire Waystar and merge Gojo with Waystar. And so we see Shiv just again operating a lot behind the scenes, but also probably dealing with the most emotional baggage out of anybody, because she's not only reeling from the fact that Logan is passed, her father is passed, but she's also going through this divorce with Tom, and she's pregnant and hasn't really told anybody really until the final episodes. She reveals that information. So I think more so than anybody, Shiv is carrying a lot. What did you think about just like her development, just the, sort of the actions and the movements that she took after the death of Logan in episode 3?
Wow, what a position Shiv is always in. And I think a lot of people don't agree with me on this at all, but Shiv's just been one of my favorite characters for a long time. And I think it's because for me, she has one of the most interesting positions of being the one woman in the family, the one daughter in the family, the one sister in the family who like you said, not kind of going with the rest of the siblings, she has also kind of always lived in this bubble, but she always had a different demeanor to her when it in terms of being professional. You know, Shiv always came to the table, and she, when she talks really well, not in like a microaggression to black people, like, oh, you speak well. You know what I'm saying? It's like she has this thing about her, this energy about her that for me always felt like, yeah, you could really do this shit. You know what I'm saying? Or like, yeah, you could. In again, her dad bought her into the idea as well at some point too. Like Shiv kind of got it. You know what I mean, kind of thing. And so it's been interesting to watch her this season because things are also crumbling in her face so crazily as she is pregnant with Tom's child, as they have a falling out. And then they kind of get back for a second with the little honeymoon phase thing, which is, okay, I have to talk about that real quick. There's a scene where Tom and Shiv are, I forgot where they were, but they are in the middle of biting each other's hands in the middle of nowhere, playing like this power game. And I'm like, does anybody else see this? Like, is anybody else watching this? I just thought that was crazy that they were doing it in the middle of like all these people walking around. But now she has been presented with something else, right? Which again, I really like this story arc for Shiv. It's not about just her anymore. It's about this child and what is she supposed to do to not only get to the top, but what get to the top for her baby now. And that is kind of her resolve for like those last couple of episodes, that we see. At first, it is like a damn, I have to betray my family in order to work with Mattson because I do want something good for myself. But then it becomes, damn, I want something good for myself and for this baby. What moves can I really make? How can I really do this thing? And it's crazy to see her switch sides and her not only be manipulative, because although she might be like close to my favorite character, she is also just as bad as really anyone else. It's also interesting to see how she has to teeter the line of, do I go back with my family? Is that the right decision? Or is it continuing to do this stuff with Mattson? Or is it being with Tom and doing what's best for Tom? It's just so interesting to me how she has to figure out so many angles to play, because she has a lot of moves she could make, but it's which one will she make? I think she has probably the most options, low key, out of anybody in which way to play this. And she ends up, she ends up kind of getting, I think, blackballed in that way though too. A lot of her options begin to close on her, and it's such a I think scary thing to watch as it progresses, man. But man, the stuff between her and Tom, I think, were golden. It's been a lot of good stuff coming out of those two. And there's also for a second, I really did think it was like there's potential that she could do this thing as well. As much as we thought Kendall could do this thing, that the writers are also like, okay, but Shiv is here, and Shiv is also still making these moves. And so yeah, it's crazy how it ended up. But man, I was kind of rooting for her. I ain't gonna lie to you, because of everything that she had kind of going against her. Again, as a woman, as Roman and Kendall were like, the optics don't look good. I'm like, Shiv, you need to win because you keep losing over and over. And then, man, it just kind of explodes in her face still at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think all these sort of different lanes she tried to pave for herself, they all ended up crumbling before her very eyes, probably just due to the fact of how they were conceived to be to begin with. I mean, the relationship with Mattson was built off of this really flirtatious energy anyway. Exactly. I think we started to wonder, like, okay, are they doing something here? Like, are Shiv and Mattson going to end up fucking? Like, that's very possible. She's separating from Tom, and you can just sense that palpable energy between those two. And Mattson even, sort of name checked that in the final episode. And then simultaneously, she's just dealing with the fact that her two brothers, once again, have kind of gotten the upper hand on her. And she agreed to it, but we know that she's not at all satisfied by the fact that she cannot be the public front-facing person that's leading this company. It's now left up to the responsibility of Kendall and Roman. And so she's continuing to try to open these lanes for herself, keep all options on the table, but everything just crumbles because they're just all built off of really terrible places that are dishonest, disgenuine, and just not great. Because also the Mattson stuff, like we find out he's as much of a scumbag as anybody because the whole number situation with the
Oh
subscribers
man.
was
Hmm.
was completely inflated and inaccurate, and that could have torpedoed the whole thing. The election shit when she's going back and forth with Kendall and Roman about that and trying to call the election and who they're going to support with Mencken and everything there. I mean, the lies just they built on top of each other. It just became too much. She was telling a lie to maintain another lie, and
Hmm.
we just saw that all crumbled, and that ultimately created this wedge between her and the other two brothers, but especially Kendall, because Kendall was now sort of primed and ready to be that guy, and Shiv was, I think the opposing force, but behind the scenes. But after the presidential election episode, that just all crumbled. The stuff with Tom is just quite ridiculous to see because of how painful it is to watch them talk so dirty and nasty to each other.
Hmm.
I mean, these
Yeah.
two by the end of that episode, the tailgate party, when they have that blow up with each other, they have
Hmm.
said some pretty unforgivable things to each other. Like the things that are said in that conversation are like things that neither one of them will ever forget. And the fact that they end up together by the end of this, presumably, is just kind of crazy. But it's so emblematic of how accepting they are of just the circumstances and the situation and how they just revert back to the status quo. But as you see them just start to unravel, it's like, oh my God, like this really is the end because they are going to the place in which there is no return. Like the shit you have said to me, I'm not forgetting that. I'm not letting that go. And it's all built off of, I think, this idea that she's always wanted to maintain the power dynamics in their relationship. She's always been the
Yeah.
domineering force in their relationship. Tom has always been sort of subservient, but now as he's rising, he's starting to like find his place. Although it's a little shaky at times, he's rising. That becomes threatening to her, and she's not having it. And so it's just better for her to retreat and to keep everything away from her and to keep a distance from Tom. And so she went on a really, really emotionally tumultuous journey. And I think by the end of it, it was just like, damn, she might have ended up in the most tragic of circumstances at the
Hmm.
end of the series finale. But I do want to just quickly talk about the funeral episode, Church and State, before we get to the series finale in a second here, because we had suspected that they were going to do a funeral episode, and this is really going to put a bow on the death of Logan, all the events that happened in between, and just like finally closing that chapter of the show out before we get to the events of the final episode. And once again, I think that they delivered one of the most incredible episodes of TV I had ever seen. I mean, also the presidential election episode before that was equally amazing just because of the tension and the newsroom. But then you get to Church and State and it's like, no, on an acting level, on a script writing level, we are just dealing with something else entirely here because
Hmm.
you get the breakdown of Roman, just the emotional toll that everything is taken on him. You get Kendall delivering his speech. You get Shiv stepping up and delivering those words as well. You also get Logan's brother who comes, sort of out of nowhere. He comes out of the background. We haven't seen him in such a long
That
time.
was great.
And
Hmm.
he keeps it completely authentic to who Logan was, just absolutely saying, like, this is not a great person. He is not a wonderful human being, but this is the reality of how he changed society and changed culture and changed business in
Yeah.
America. What did you think about just seeing that all boil over? Because I thought it was just like one of the most, again, one of the most incredible episodes of TV that we've gotten in the past, at least decade, I would say.
No, I agree. It is a amazing piece of television, man. And when you listen to the director and how he just wanted the funeral scene to be as real as possible, and they tried to make it as one shot as they could, you know what I mean? Like to make everything go as smooth as possible, to give everything that they could to the actors. And I mean, I had to say it's successful because the emotion in that episode, oh my God. I know I was all over the place. I was going through it in that episode. And I think it's because in some ways we were living through Roman a little bit, right? Where we, of course, we had seen Logan die, but there's still something in us is like, damn, is this dude really gone? You know what I mean? And it exploded at the funeral for us, I think, as viewers, the same way that it kind of did for Roman a little bit. Like, no, this dude is really gone in this TV show. And it was, man, what a tremendous episode. And I love all the little callbacks in the episode where even you kind of got all of Logan's women sitting together all of a sudden, which is crazy. They were all like lined up in a row. I was like, what are we doing? Logan had all of his women in a row. He had all his family in another. And it's just crazy to watch this unfold the way I think in which it was unfolded. And like you said, for Ewan to come up there and for him to start speaking and be like, my brother was not a good person. We all know this. And I really love that about it. I really love that they were honest, because I think that doesn't happen enough in real life either. Not that you should talk bad about everybody at everybody's funeral, but sometimes you need to be realistic. And as somebody as big that Logan Roy was to them in this world, I love that somebody was like, this is the real. And this is and I love how Kendall kind of followed up to that too. And I think the funeral, what also made it good is we were talking about how it kind of to feel like Kendall, but also Shiv had options. The funeral kind of felt like that. As soon as Roman breaks down, in my mind, I'm like, Roman's gone. Roman is no longer in the picture of who is going to succeed here. At that moment, I'm like, Kendall stepped up again and had another really good speech off the top of the dome. He looked at Roman's cards and was like, "Oh, I'm good with it. Skip these cards. I'm gonna talk about my father, how I want to talk about them." But it felt like a very I'm the eldest boy moment, but like in the better sense. You know what I mean? He did feel like a big brother in that moment. And I was like, damn, Kendall's kind of doing this thing. But Shiv kind of followed up, and I was like, that's okay too. I can see that as well. So I love how they're not only giving us the proper burial of Logan Roy, and all of his skeletons are literally in the room at the same time, but they're also setting up us as viewers as like, who is going to lead this ship? Who's going to do this thing? With the way it's shot, with the emotion going on in the room, it's just a really, really well crafted episode. And I love, again, I just love TV like this, where you can just sit in a room and you can see how each person is reacting to the situation. And yeah, man, I love it. I love how when Ewan was going into to talk, and everyone was like, Greg, get him off, and they're like, but you're with Greg though. You're like, what are you supposed to do? You're not going to tackle him. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to say no. You can't speak at his own brother's funeral. And so yeah, I love the little stuff like that. And it was just a good episode of TV, man. I'm with you. It really is great.
Yeah, you just coming into it had to know that this was going to be something again completely different. It at that point was the longest running episode of the series until the series finale. It was like 80 minutes long. So you just knew that they were going to really rest in this moment and spend the time that they needed to. And it becomes just a profoundly moving piece of television because of how human it felt, which is wild to say considering the characters that we're dealing with. We're talking about insanely wealthy people, billionaires that are going to have money in their family for generations and generations to come. And even in the midst of all of that, and we've seen them do some incredibly horrific things to each other and to other people, you still just can't help but feel for them in that moment, and to know that they have had some pretty fucked up young childhoods, and a lot of that is a result of their father and the way that he's moved and navigated the world. And this is all boiling over for them in this moment, the realization that he is gone, because now this is the finite, sort of element to somebody passing away is the funeral. It's the punctuation mark on it all. Like, this is the end of it. And to see Roman go through what he went through to try to deliver the eulogy and just have this moment where he completely breaks down, it was shattering to see, honestly. Like, Roman has been terrible, but it's also like, wow, this guy's been holding this in, like you say, the pre-grieving of it all, which was bullshit. It was a lie, and just can't do it. And it's really shattering to see that. And then to see everything else happen after that, where these kids are trying to still uphold some good sense of memories with their father, Kendall, and then Shiv. They're trying to speak to the positive about him. You know that it's truthful, you know that it's authentic, but they're also still internally wrestling with the fact that this guy has marked us in so many significant ways, many of them not good, but we still have to get up here and emotionally close this book on this chapter of our lives. It just becomes one of those things where it's like, I don't even know how to necessarily process this myself as a viewer, because so many things are happening. And then you go to the mausoleum and see them, sort of bury him. And again, Roman just can't deal with it. He has to get up and walk away. Yeah. He just can't even watch them bury his father. And it's like this huge, like almost like palace that he's carved out for himself. He spent like $5 million on a burial site, and you get kind of showing up like, yeah, maybe I'll take a top bunk in here. You get those emotionally funny moments as well, but it's all set to the backdrop of stuff that's just incredibly tragic and incredibly sad to see. And I think that this really kind of spelled out the doom that lied ahead for all of the siblings, in particular with the next episode and the series finale, which is, something that we had all been waiting for, to just see how this was all going to go down. The series finale was pretty much centered around the final vote that was going to take place, whether or not Gojo was going to acquire Waystar, what was going to be the future of this empire that's been within this family for so many generations, and how was it all going to fold out. And so we see Matson, of course, sort of back into the fold, and ultimately the board is going to go to their decision and vote on what's going to be the future. And we get a really, really cool moment, I think, between the three siblings that we hadn't seen since the last season, where Kendall had his breakdown at the end of season 3, and the siblings sort of comfort him, and they sort of crowd around him and make him feel like he's loved, and he admits to them that he killed somebody, earlier in the series. We sort of get that reflected here when they're, sort of with their mother, because Roman is sort of retreated after the events of episode 9 back to his mother, Carolyn. And they just have that really emotionally profound moment, I think, between each other where they can just act normal. They're putting together the smoothie for Kendall. They basically deemed him like, yeah, you're going to be the leader. We'll stand behind you, bro, and support you in all of this. And it feels like things are good. It feels like that they have like reverted back to their childhood ways, and they're sort of in a good place after all the crazy shit that happened. But I think as a viewer, knowing what the show is, knowing how they designed it to be, you had to know that, well, this happiness isn't going to last long. This kind of feels like the one final happy moment that we'll ever get with these characters before it ultimately all blows up. What did you think about sort of those first moments of the episode that just sort of, put them back in a I guess a state of cohesion, which we just don't often see amongst those three siblings?
Man, it's so interesting because that is another moment. You're like, this is pretty happy right now, especially where everyone feels like they're agreeing on something, versus before it's like we are crowding Kendall because of sadness and tragedy. This was great to see because if it did feel like a celebration. And we do talk about how I think removed these people are from regular humans in society, but when you see them do something like this, you're like, man, there is some human in y'all, even though this is like something that does feel more childish for them, right? They are making a smoothie for what's the King's juice, I forgot what it's called, but it's funny because it does feel the most like, dang, y'all, I feel like if y'all went outside and touched some grass and talked to some people, y'all would be okay, but y'all just don't do that. And this is the moment they do it with each other, though, and it feels good in that moment because we've seen them do nothing but bicker. And like you said, when they do come together, it is because something tragic. They came together because of the funeral. They came together because Kendall was sad about something. They came together for other things, you know what I mean? And this is the moment. It's like, okay, guys, we're actually banding together for something good this time. Let's have a plan and make sure everybody is happy in this moment. And I do also like the moment where Kendall does feel, I don't know, he feels the most hopeful in this moment. And then we've seen him kind of throughout the show, because usually Kendall feels like he feels like he is entitled to the position, but you could always tell there's like a hopelessness to him, like he's never going to get it. He is hungry for it. And here his siblings are actually able to kind of, I think, uplift him in that way to make him feel like, okay, yes, you deserve this thing, or you're going to get this thing. But I like how they come to a conclusion and they're able to I guess have this moment of unity. And especially when they get there, it wasn't unity at all either, though, right? It's like Shiv is on the other side when they get there, but this felt like a moment where Shiv was just going to go check on her little brother. And I love that, versus Kendall didn't feel like that. Kendall was like, bro, you got to come vote. You need to come vote. And I love how it does start hostile, but it does end up kind of getting diffused again by all the heartfeltness of it. It was fine, man. I love the small talk when they're in the water between Shiv and Roman, and they're joking. They were like, are we really going to give this guy this thing? Are we really going to do this? And they decide to go ahead and do it. But that felt like a real sibling moment. I can imagine, I don't know, them being younger and having these exact talks about Kendall, in some form or fashion about something. I don't know what it is, but I could tell it had happened before, where they have to talk amongst themselves before they give Kendall something or this and that. So yeah, I thought it was cool, but I could also tell it was the calm before the storm, because the show doesn't work like that. They just don't get to be merry, and then that's the end of the TV show. I could definitely feel there was something else coming, and there was something not right about that moment. It was too happy. It was too everyone's getting along. It was 2, everyone wins for it to actually go down. So that's another reason I think I enjoyed those moments.
Yeah, this is the part of the episode I was actively checking the runtime because I'm like, oh my God, I'm starting to stress myself out. How much time is left? Because right now things are too happy. And eventually we're going to go nuclear and it's going to be Armageddon before our very eyes. And so I was just like, very, very anxious about what was going to unfold over the next sort of hour after this all took place. But it was nice to see them in this moment, especially considering what happened 2 episodes prior with the election in Mencken and how that just blew up in front of Shiv's face. Like Roman and Kendall realized Shiv's been fucking them, no pun intended, of course. But that whole situation and that whole moment sort of set the stage for this battle that was going to take place between the 3 siblings. But the funeral brought them back together because it is such a sad moment. It's such a traumatic experience to go through, and they don't have anybody else but each other, so they have to just by necessity stick together. And that bleeds over into this episode because of Roman sort of retreating and Kendall needing him, but Shiv just trying to figure out what was going on there. But it's all just setting the stage for really a doomsday that lied ahead. And that's exactly what happened. We finally do get to the situation where they are going to go to vote about this acquisition. Obviously Kendall, Roman, and presumably what we thought Shiv were going to vote against the deal and try to block the deal for Gojo. And we know a lot of the legacy sort of characters that had more of their close knitted relationships with Logan, they were on board with it. They were ready to go ahead and cash out, make this deal happen. The Franks of the world, all of those people, Carolina, those figures, they were going to move forward with this. And then it all just unravels completely. Shiv becomes the avatar for the uncertainty in the room. She becomes the one where it's like, actually, let me take a beat on this. I don't know what I want to do. It's almost like all of her emotions and everything about the events of this season just sort of overwhelmed her in the moment. It's like she almost saw the past 6 or 7 episodes flash before her eyes, really probably their entire lifetime, because she had a realization because of two very important things. One, she found out about Tom becoming the CEO. So that is obviously influencing her decision, but she also is remembering Kendall and who he is as a person and who she's known him to be. And also probably, the fact that they were on 2 opposite sides of the fence just 2 episodes ago because of everything that had happened. And she becomes pretty much responsible for this whole thing unraveling and it swaying in the decision of Gojo actually acquiring Waystar. And it just leads to, I think, what is the equivalent of a cataclysmic sort of breakdown for these siblings. We just see the worst of the worst happen between these 3. Like, yeah, they've always said very, very incendiary things to each other. They've always been fucked up in terms of their remarks, but we see it become physical. We see Kendall just explode. As you said earlier, he screams, "I'm the eldest boy." He doesn't even know how to deal with this. Then he puts hands on Roman, and Shiv is on the verge of a breakdown as well. And they also just bring back full circle the fact that Kendall has a whole fucking body on him. Like, did you kill somebody, bro? And now he's trying to backpedal and say, like, no, I didn't. I just said that to try to bring us together. So much shit is happening within the span of like 6 or 7 minutes. It's crazy to me how they're able to just like bring all of this emotional turmoil to the forefront of this decision. But we just see everything blow up right before our very eyes. And there's a point of no return in the events of this few minutes here that ultimately results in the Gojo acquisition. So just kind of share your thoughts on how you were feeling watching this whole thing play out, the fact that Shiv made the decision that she made, and also just sort of the effect that it had on Kendall in that very moment where he just became sort of a lesser version of himself, but right before our very eyes.
Man, there's so much here. It really is. And to see it all blow up again so quick, it's crazy. But this is, man, we can't talk about that moment enough, man, where Logan is telling his kids, "I love y'all, but y'all are unserious people." It is literally the resounding clip, soundbite, whatever you want to quote of the season. It really is. And you constantly feel it. And what's so interesting too, though, is to me, they've denied it for a very long time. And you could tell even when the 100 was happening, or they're talking about the 100, you could always feel, or they're always like, man, is this it? Is this what we're supposed to be doing? And I think, again, Shiv does just have enough sense to be like, we're kind of bullshit. This is all bullshit. And I love how I love how Roman also kind of agreed in that moment, even though he voted against the acquisition. It's still interesting though that Roman also was like, we're bullshit. And we have been bullshit for a while. And he always felt that as well, but he was still willing, I guess, to go with to go with Logan to the fences, to go with him to the end because of the not Logan, Kendall to the fences for the family thing. You know what I mean? I think to keep it in the family was important to Kendall at least a little bit, or to Roman at least a little bit. But I love how it blows up, man. I really do, because Shiv, I think she's in that position for a couple reasons. One, like you said, she was just against her brothers a couple days ago, completely, right? She was trying to get that top spot. But not only that, was she only trying to dig away for herself. Again, this is way earlier in the season. She makes that decision. But I also feel like she thought in those early moments that they were bullshit, right? It's not just like, hey, I want the top spot. It's also like, my brothers are kind of bullshit as well. Like, I don't know how that's going to go down over here. And then we get to that moment. She's like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to vote for you to lead this company. And again, she just becomes the voice of reason in that moment, because Kendall kind of did kill a guy, a guy who has a body, probably shouldn't be leading a company in this way. But it's not only that. I think when she finds out Tom, if this thing goes through, that he's going to get the spot, it's for a couple reasons. One, her baby daddy leading the company is genius. Why would you say no to that? It is the father of your child could potentially inherit a company at some point in time. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's another spinoff in 10 years. It's Succession Part 2 with Tom and Shiv's baby. You know what I'm saying? But also, I feel like she felt guilty for everything she put Tom through. I feel like in that moment, there's a part of her that felt like, man, maybe Tom does deserve this thing. Maybe I have put Tom through so much bullshit. Maybe I put Tom through so much turmoil with the cheating and I'm telling him you're having his baby the night of an election as he runs one of the biggest news corporations. Like, Shiv has been tearing up Tom for a very long time. And part of me feels like she also says yes because this is her moment to give him something. This is her moment to say, you may not see this in real time, Tom. You may not see that I voted for you. I don't know if she tells him at some point. I don't know what goes down. We really don't see that. But that I low-key gave you this thing because I took so much away from you. That's what it also felt like too in that moment, a little bit. And I really like that about it. So it just all of these things coming together to explode in their face, and they are not having it. I love how upset Kendall is. I love how unsure Roman is, but also kind of on board with what everything that Shiv is saying. Is just, it all makes sense. That's what I love about it. It is chaos, but it's like controlled chaos. Everything is like, yeah, I get that. I get everything you're saying, Shiv, because I think we all understood and felt it too. The whole season was like, these guys kind of suck at what they're doing. They're not good. And it finally came back in this episode from Shiv in particular to say, yeah, we're all bullshit and we're all unserious people. And I really love that about it. I think it was great.
I think that's gracious of you to say that about Shiv and Tom. I honestly, I don't believe at all that she was trying to give anything to Tom. I think it's purely based on the fact that she found out that this guy that she was married to, that she always thought she had the power over, figured out a way to maneuver the system and to go behind her, to put himself in the most supreme position of power. Therefore, that results in her basically saying like, well, I have no cards to play with anymore. This is probably the last one that I have to play with. What is the best possible situation for me personally? It's the proximity to power, because I can't have the power itself, but it's the proximity that I'll be able to get to it, because we're still technically married. I'm having this man's baby. There could still be a situation here in which I inherit all the fortunes that are going to come with this. And she also knows that she will probably always be able to manipulate and control Tom at the end of the day, because that's the dynamic of their relationship. Because once Tom becomes CEO, she can still run shit behind the scenes. She won't have the title. That won't be the case for her, because Matsson, he won't allow it. Matsson realized, like, you know what? I kind of want to fuck your wife, and that's just not a good look. He at least has the self-awareness to say, like, I can't have that woman being the leader of my company because I want to do something with her. I want to do bad things with her. Which is also wild as fuck that he told that to Tom. And Tom,
crazy,
being the fucking just worm that he just takes it. He doesn't say anything. He accepts it because he wants the power more than anything. He's willing to degrade himself and lose basically all sense of his dignity and allow this man to just talk any way in which about his wife because he wants to be that CEO so bad. So Tom and Shiv to me are just, they're deplorable. They really are deplorable. I did feel for Shiv for a long time, and I still do to a certain extent, but their actions and the way that they moved throughout this entire season, the way that they spoke to each other, again, as I mentioned earlier, just reflect a super toxic, super unhealthy, and a terrible situation for the both of them. However, they are both so consumed with the idea of being in control and in charge that they just put all that shit aside and they said, you know what, we're going to do this. And it doesn't matter what bodies we accumulate along the way. It doesn't matter how many fucking bones we have in our closet about this shit. We're putting that all aside because the power and the proximity of the power, it's the most important thing. And I think on the opposite side of that, Kendall and Roman, that breakdown makes a lot of sense just because this guy and his entire existence was based off of the idea that he was going to be up next. That's all his life has been. And he's been consumed with that idea, as you noted earlier, since he was 7 years old. And that's so important that he told us that piece of information, because what happens to a guy who has been working towards a goal and an idea for pretty much his entire life, and it crumbles right before his very eyes? He explodes, he fumbles, he completely loses the entire sense of his self. And I think that last shot of Kendall at the end of this is just very emblematic of who he is. He doesn't know who he is anymore. He doesn't have a life. He's just less of a person now. And I know Jeremy Strong talked about that they filmed a sequence in which he tries to jump into the fucking East River. Like he tries to basically kill himself because of how fucked up he is in the head at this moment. And they decided to not include that. But I think if they did include it, it still would be on brand for him because he doesn't know who he is anymore. And Roman just having that realization, that was all built up in the previous episode, again, when he goes out to the protesters and he just realizes that he's nothing to them. Like, it doesn't matter how many billions you have, my guy. Nobody gives a fuck about you in reality. Like, you're just a rich, wealthy white person, but your existence is just based off of that. You don't know who you are. And so I just want to quickly wrap up here and sort of ask you about those final few moments. We see Shiv reunite with Tom, and they have that super awkward moment of, I guess, holding hands with each other in the limousine as Tom has become the king of this whole new operation and he's on top of the world. Kendall, as I mentioned, is just floating in the world by himself, doesn't really have any purpose anymore. Who knows what the fate of him will be in the future. And then, of course, Roman sort of ends up back in that bar in very much the same way in which we found him. Just this guy who I guess has accepted his place in his life and accepted the fact that he's just that guy that wants to get fucked up and have drinks and make jokes. Like, he doesn't want to be serious about any of this. And so I think that moment of him just being in the bar and getting that drink just kind of resembles like who he is at his core and who he is in his heart. What did you think about just, how everything wrapped up and how they, sort of closed out the story of Succession?
Man, shout out to the Disgusting Brothers. They low-key won. The Disgusting Brothers won. What did he say to Greg? I have just enough capital. And he like put a sticker on his head. I think that was hilarious. I said, Greg, I want better for you, bro. But he's kind of being groomed by Tom, though, right? Where it's like he's kind of ended up just like Tom. He's got to be a worm sometimes. And so just as much Tom was a worm for Mattson, Greg has to be a worm for Tom. It's so interesting in that way. But they do end up winning in the end, man. Kendall, it's sad. It's a sad story. And again, a lot of this is just they grew up in power, man. They grew up in wealth. It's hard when no one has told you mean anything else outside of this family dynamic, when no one has told you that you matter in that way, nor have you ever been in a position to matter in that way. Wow. To me, that's the story of Succession, right? It's like, now what? Now what do you do when you don't have it? That's part of the lesson of the show. There's Succession, but what happens when you don't get it? Imagine you've been waiting to get this $3 million your entire life from your auntie, and she finally passes, and then it's like, well, we lost it. There's no 3 million for you anymore. Now what do you do? Like, what do you do with your hands? Now you're broke. You're not only broke, but you're broke in. You know what I'm saying? And so I love how we kind of end in that way too. These are kids and people who just don't know what else to do. And it's the part of the reason the ending of Tom getting this makes so much sense to me. He was one of the only people that actually worked. Tom, no matter what you think about him, he's a scumbag. Like you said, he's a worm. He did have to do all these things. He had a job. Tom had a job and he was doing okay at it. Unfortunately, he did end up calling an election, probably for somebody he shouldn't have been calling an election for at
A
all.
neo-Nazi at
A
that.
neo-Nazi at that. It's fucking terrible. But when it comes to business and actually who you're going to pick, you should probably pick the guy who actually had the job, you know, who actually could provide some sort of value. And they actually gave it to Tom. I thought that made so much sense to me in the end, given the way these kids had acted. And so, like you said, man, Kendall had nothing else to live for. He lived his whole life thinking he's going to get this thing. He didn't get it. That's where he lived. That's it. Now, what does he do? I have no idea what Kendall does. He is good at talking and business and stuff. Maybe he does try to go make the 100 or do something, but we don't know. But what we do know is he lost everything that he thought his life was about. That's a sad way to end. That's a sad way to end. And I like it though, because it makes sense. You don't get to kill somebody and then go get the throne. And even though that would have been realistic, because I'm sure, I mean, the whole boat thing too, and all of this is very realistic. I'm sure there's a CEO out there who has killed somebody. It would have been realistic, but I love how they decide not to go that direction. I do. It just made sense to me. Roman, not much to say there. You said it all. It makes sense to me. He finds out he's also really nothing without this. He does just want to be the party guy. He does end up in a bar just drinking again. He does just want to make quippy lines and be out of pocket all the time, but that's also all he has given the world, and that's all the world will give him. You only get out what you put in. You haven't put much in, so that's what you're getting out. That's the story of Succession to me. Shiv, again, I think she did have the business sense, but she also was in the world with them. She was in the same world. She was in the same group of siblings, and she could. What is slightly, again, I still don't get me wrong, I don't feel bad for Shiv at all either. What is slightly more sad about Shiv is she never even had the opportunity to really give anything. Though a lot of times you could tell she wanted to. That's what's kind of sad about Shiv. Shiv wanted to go make a change. Shiv didn't want Macon to win. Shiv was the one going against, you know what I mean, this election. She wanted, what was the other guy's name? Macon, and it's funny, I can only remember the bad guy, not the goddamn good guy. But she did go against Macon. She did want better for race relations and women and all of these things. But it's sad for her because she never got the opportunity, though that's what she wanted. That was a little bit more sad for Shiv. But you only put in, get out what you put in. She couldn't put in anything. Sorry, Shiv. You also were an asshole. You also did all these things and hurt these people and talked to Tom in certain ways and were manipulative. So she was also dealt the hand she was dealt. She kind of dealt her own hand as well. And so I love the way it ends because it does feel realistic to me. I think in those ways, from a business perspective, of like you would pick the guy who actually had a job. And it's so interesting because I wonder how long Mattson had been thinking about that. How long Mattson had been like, why wouldn't I just give it to him if he's the person who's there actually doing the thing? You know, I don't know. I think it's very interesting that it ended like that, but I like how it made sense. And I think the writers did what was in best interest for the characters. Not only the characters, but also the message they were trying to convey throughout the show. So I really love the ending. I love how it doesn't end happy. I love the weird hand holding awkwardness between Shiv and Tom. I thought it was like, yeah, that's accurate to me from what we've gotten. Yeah, and I appreciate it, man. I thought it was well done.
None of the kids got it, which I think stayed completely true to just the whole purpose and themes of the show. And I think that ending it any other way could have been still really good, but I think that this is the most true to form ending that none of them won. In essence, I mean, you can, I guess, relatively speaking, say Shiv may have won, but just due to the proximity that she'll have to the power. But she has to be in a marriage that she absolutely does not want to be in. Like, it's very clear that she does not want to be with Tom. Like, it couldn't be more clear to me, but she's going to continue to live her life, sacrificing, I guess, to an extent to live and have this lifestyle. Kendall's just devastated as fuck. He doesn't know how to maneuver. Eventually he'll land on his feet, I think. Eventually he'll start just another company and try to build something from the ground up. He has that sort of spirit to be a little bit more scrappy and to go and make something of his own, but it'll never fulfill what he always thought that he deserved in his life. It'll never fulfill that desire to succeed his father and to basically lead the company that was built within the family. And Roman's just going to continue to be Roman. He's going to land on his feet as well. He'll find something that he can invest into, something that he's more interested in, but he won't have necessarily a satisfying life because he doesn't allow real relationships. He doesn't allow those to form. He's always negating other people's feelings. He's very much lashing out at people and doesn't decide to be vulnerable with anybody. So he won't have anything meaningful necessarily in his life in terms of relationship, but will he care? I don't know. I think he's just going to have to wrestle and deal with the realization that he has a certain function and purpose in this world, and that's what it's going to ultimately be for him for the rest of his life. And so it's all tragic. It's tragic to witness. It's tragic to see. But these characters, at the end of this all, will still get billions and billions and billions of dollars based on the deal alone. Like, how bad can you feel for any of them? And again, I think that that's kind of the purpose of what they were setting out to do here. Quick closing thoughts about Succession as a show. Now that it's all wrapped up, they have concluded the story. Where does this just, sort of fall for you in terms of shows that you've seen, and how do you sort of reflect on just the legacy of what they set out to do here with Succession over 4 seasons?
Wow. This is a show that I think episode 1, I would have never assumed that I would like it as much as I do. This is not I know a lot of people who still do not like Succession. I actually had a conversation with somebody yesterday, who he was talking about just how he just doesn't like the show because he just thinks it's about a bunch of rich people. And I think that's fair on one hand, and the other hand, I think that's the point. And I think, maneuvering how those people I think function in their own bubble within the world is so interesting. That's what makes it interesting to me. And I think Succession has, I think, scratched the itch I didn't know I had when it comes to seeing these rich people implode within themselves or be mean to each other, and kind of just see how what that looks like, because we know it exists in real life, right? We know these ideas of these big billionaires and CEOs and companies and things like that. We know it exists. Shoot, I work for a big company myself. We go through not Succession kind of stuff, you know what I'm saying, but we go through org changes and all kind of things like that. And so to be able to look into, I think, people of power and privilege who have that, and just to see a little bit into their world is interesting because of how much they could, really be like this. I think a lot of people really are like Succession, and to see that reflection of that in the real world is really cool. And I appreciate Succession for that. And man, I really do love this show. I think it fits in a league of just great HBO content first and foremost. I had to put that out there. HBO has been putting out bangers for a very long time. But I think it does fit in one of the greatest, and I think it has its own lane. It doesn't feel like any of the other great, of course, shows in general, but HBO shows I've ever watched before. Again, I could have never guessed that I would like this show as much as I do, coming out of Sopranos and The Wire and Game of Thrones and all of these other good shows, that we watch on HBO. I just couldn't imagine that I would be like, damn, I really like this piece of art, man. And it's just really good writing and really good acting, and what that could look like, almost not no matter the story, because we know the story is amazing, but it's they really did this thing. And I love how they set out for a vision and said, it's time to end it. I love that, because we don't get that a lot. We don't get let's end this thing. I love when people know and feel when to end it, and they ended Succession on a high note for me. I absolutely adore and love this show. I think it's among the greats. It doesn't look like anything else. I think the acting I think the Emmys are about to fly. Sure, they flew before, but something about a show ending where the Emmys just fly after that. People are waiting for a show to end, and it's time to give them their flowers. Man, I don't know who's going to get what or nominated for what, but Succession is about to clean up at these Emmys as well. And I will always recognize it as definitely one of my favorite shows of course, like this time period, whatever this time period that you will call. I have to, I think, reimagine it in the grand scheme of TV shows, because we've got a lot of greatness in terms of TV shows, but man, definitely within the past decade, it's top 3 in the past decade, I think, of TV shows for me, and how much I was looking forward to watching this TV show.
Yeah, I think Succession is one of the greatest ever to do it. This is just an extraordinary piece of stories and sagas of these intertwining characters examining corporate business, big business in America, families, legacy, lineage, historical wealth, all of those really, really big ideas that have been very much ingrained in American culture and shape everyday commerce. Like this show is tackling that stuff directly, but it's also looking even deeper at the inner turmoil and the hearts and the emotions that these people sort of contemplate on a day-to-day basis, and how that impacts society, and how these individual decisions that they make that they don't even second guess have larger, much larger implications, excuse me, for how we live in on a day-to-day basis in society. And so I think that the fact that they could examine that stuff and really take a microscope and look deeply into sort of the soul of America and just how business operates and moves, it's a really brave thing to do, and it takes a certain mind and a certain set of capabilities to really go for it in that sense. And it's created some of the most memorable lines of dialogue, some of the greatest pieces of writing that I think I've ever seen in a television show, and really some of the most memorable characters that we've gotten, and just the whole story that they set out to do was just absolutely incredible. I can't wait to just continue to rewatch the show over the next few years and just grow even more my relationship with it. So, folks, those are our thoughts on the series finale and season 4 as a whole of Succession. If you've checked out season 4 of the HBO series, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.